I'm Dr. Linda Carney. Welcome to another episode of Health Reboot, our week-long series of presentations for life-saving information that is truly transformational. Tonight is topic number 6, cancer, the prevention and reversal, long-term remission for cancer. I'm very grateful to those on the team that have made this possible, specifically my husband Sean Carney, and he is handling the online through Zoom, Facebook Live, and YouTube. There are many others on the team, including Isaac and Meshach, and we're very grateful to each one who has volunteered their time to make this effort a success and to bring to people in Pine Bluff and to the wider world online a message of hope. Remember that we always start with a disclaimer that this is not the establishment of a medical treatment relationship between a physician and a patient, but we're really glad you're here for this information seminar. It's simply education, and we want you to work with your physician, because if you decide for the first time to adopt some of these life-saving interventions, such as getting to bed earlier, exercising more, eating a low-fat, oil-free, plant-based diet, it's possible that if you're on certain medications, dosages may need to be adjusted downward, and your physician or healthcare provider is qualified to do this. So keep in contact with them. And we'd like to thank each one of you that has come out tonight on such a rainy night. It is pouring out here in Pine Bluff. It's raining cats and dogs. We're very grateful to everyone who has braved the weather and come out in person. Thank you for being here. Welcome. The Irish Cancer Society is now giving formal recognition to proven links between cancer and certain foods. We'll find out what those foods are. Cancer is on the rise. Welcome. We're so glad you're here. Thank you for being here. Cancer is on the rise. Already by 2015, it had become one of the leading causes of death in women, and it has already become the #1 cause of death for some racial groups, according to the Centers for Disease Control. Cancer has been found to be the leading cause of death for patients of the Kaiser Permanente system in 8 Western states, but that data is about 5 years old. There are more than 15 states now for which cancer is the leading cause of death, overtaking the ones we talked about last night, which is vascular disease, heart attack, and stroke. Where does cancer start? Is it all about our genetics? Well, cancer does start in genes. Whether the damage to the DNA in the nucleus, whether that damage has been inherited or acquired along the way, because the environment is full of toxins, whether we're eating those environments or breathing them in or simply living near them. Animal protein damages DNA more than any other environmental damager. How do we know this? Well, researchers have figured out that the DNA of a child is a little bit different in its packaging than that of an adult. The DNA of an adult is wound up tight, like a ball of rubber bands. That ball of rubber bands is what the inside of a golf ball looks like if you've ever taken apart a golf ball. It's tight, and it's hard for things to penetrate into that tight little ball. It's as if the wagons are circled, and it's got good defenses to keep out things that could damage the DNA. But the DNA of a child is half unwound. It doesn't have its defenses up. Something could come in and hit that DNA of the child and hurt it. Something like the animal protein in the diet that we feed children. And why is the DNA of a child half unwound? Well, it's because the child is growing rapidly. In fact, the first year of life is the most rapid period of growth in the whole lifespan. And the DNA transcriptases have to get in there, copy the DNA, make a new cell, copy the DNA, make another cell, make another cell. And so it makes sense for the body to keep the DNA slightly unraveled so that copies can be made, cells can be produced, and the body can grow rapidly. But that half unwound DNA leaves the child vulnerable to the cancer-causing effects of feeding them animal protein, such as the Cheez-Its or the cheesy goldfish crackers or whatever we're feeding children, little snacky things to keep them quiet till we can get out of the grocery store. These things don't seem to cause cancer right away. they seem to damage the DNA, and the DNA lies dormant, usually not causing cancer for decades later, until the child becomes into their 50s or 60s. You see, the 50s and 60s are the cancer decades. That's when a person is more likely, if they're going to die of cancer, it's probably going to show up in the 50s and 60s. Now, if a person successfully passes through their 50s and 60s without getting cancer, they enter their 70s and 80s, which are known as the vascular disease decades, such as stroke and heart attack are more likely to take the person. But truly, the older we get, the more likely cancer is, especially of the breast and prostate, because these are some of the most common cancers there are. And breast and prostate cancer are so similar, of course, in two different genders, two different organs, but very, very similar causes, very similar types of cancers, and very, very common, so well studied. So how do we know that when a child's DNA is damaged, it lies dormant and then can produce cancer decades later? Remember what happened in World War II in Japan? The atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and unfortunately some people died instantly. Other people died weeks later of radiation sickness. However, some people were destined to die of the DNA that was damaged to produce in them cancer. But when did the peak incidence of those cancer deaths occur? It was 4 decades later. The peak of cancer deaths after Hiroshima and Nagasaki was 4 decades later, showing that DNA that's damaged can lie dormant. But there is a science called epigenetics, and epigenetics offers hope. Epigenetics, epi means upon or modifying the genetics. You see, we can have genes that are damaged, or genes as we go along, damaged as we go along, or inherited that are programmed to cause cancer, but our lifestyle choices, how early we get to bed, how much we exercise, whether we drink caffeine or alcohol, whether we smoke tobacco or chew it, nicotine in any form, whether we use animal protein in our diet, all these things can switch off genes that are programmed to cause cancer. So the hopeful science of epigenetics tells us that if we change our lifestyle habits to the healthy ones, we may be able to prevent the cancer that we are programmed to produce once we get into our 50s and 60s. And of course, not all cancers wait until then. Of course, childhood cancers are, rapidly increasing because children drink a lot of cow's milk, and many of those cancers are thought to be due to viruses carried by cow's milk. Whole food plant-based diets are protective against cancer because only plants have fiber. Meat never had fiber, never will. Eggs have no fiber. Dairy has no fiber. The more fiber in the food, the better the hormone balance. Now, you heard me say that on Wednesday when we talked about hormone balance and a man's testosterone, how we can get that raised up without taking supplements, how a woman can avoid the problems of excess estrogen. We talked about estrogen being a growth promoter. And remember, we talked about that famous surgeon, Dr. Dennis Burkitt, for whom a childhood lymphoma was named. And he was a cancer researcher, and he found out the less fiber in the diet, the more disease of many kinds, especially cancer. The less fiber, the more estrogen. But why? Dr. Golden published in 1994 in the journal Cancer that low fiber diets make excess estrogen, and this excess estrogen is a growth promoter. Remember, I told you the little story of our liver that acts like a washing machine. 24/7, the liver is taking out impurities from the blood that it doesn't want there, such as excess estrogen, which can act as a growth promoter, and of course growth out of control is cancer. So the liver knows that excess estrogen is not a good thing, and the liver is taking the excess estrogen out of the blood of men or women, because men can get excess estrogen also. And what the liver does is it sends that estrogen down a little tube called the bile duct, where it dumps that estrogen into the intestine. We're hoping that there's a sponge called fiber in the intestines. It would have gotten in there from the food that we eat. That fiber, like a sponge, soaks up estrogen and carries it out in the solid waste when you're sitting in the toilet, and in the bathroom on the toilet. And if there's no fiber, the estrogen is reabsorbed into the bloodstream through the intestinal villi, the little finger-like projections that line the inside of the intestine. We call this reabsorption of estrogen that the liver works so hard to take out enterohepatic circulation. And entero means intestines, and hepatic means liver. So the liver took it out, but the intestines reabsorb it back in if fiber isn't there to soak it up like a sponge. Dr. Rose published in 1991 that fiber is like the estrogen sponge. Like a paper towel called Bounty, the quicker picker-upper, fiber removes estrogen and carries it out with the solid waste. Dr. Rose's study found that the less fiber in the diet, the more excess estrogen and the more breast cancer. The less fiber in the diet, the more breast cancer. So the less plant-based your diet is, the greater your risk of breast cancer. The less fiber in the diet, the worse the imbalance of excess estrogen, whether you're a woman or a man. Meat promotes cancer. In fact, meat is a proven risk factor for cancer, and I'm quoting the Irish Cancer Society. Processed meats are a definite cause of cancer, with red meat a, quote, probable cause. And this was made formal by them, formally recognized in 2019. I'm very proud of the Irish Cancer Society for doing that. But even before the Irish Cancer Society came on board, the World Health Organization told us that there is a class 1 carcinogen that we need to be careful of. Now, what are the classes of carcinogens? Class 1 is this definitely causes cancer. Class 4, well, we're pretty sure this never causes cancer. Like drinking water doesn't cause cancer. We all know that. But class 1 carcinogens, processed meat, are now classified as a class 1 carcinogen, meaning, yeah, we know that this causes cancer. What is processed meat? Bacon, ham, sausage. You might think that those are 3 different kinds of meat, but they all come from one animal. Which animal is that?
Pig.
The pig, that's right. Hot dogs, bologna, jerky. These are class 1 carcinogens, a definite cause of cancer. We know these things cause cancer. And then red meat, like burgers from beef. And of course there's lamb, there's pork, there's goat. They're acknowledged as probable causes of cancer. Meet Dr. John Kelly, MD. He is one of the most busy and famous doctors in Dublin before he retired. And his patients, as they came along through his general practice, some of them were being diagnosed with cancer. What he did was he didn't tell them, hey, don't do surgery, don't do chemo, don't do radiation. He didn't tell them that. What he did in his famous book, Stop Feeding Your Cancer, is he told them about the power of a plant-based diet to help them do better now that they've been diagnosed with cancer. He told them to stop eating meat, dairy, and eggs. And some of them listened, and some of them didn't. And some of them went for the surgery, chemo, and radiation, and some of them didn't. And he was supportive of them either way. But what he did in his book was he got their permission to tell their story. And what happened was, if the patients gave up animal products, by and large, they did well with their cancer. I'm not saying that 100% of the people, they did fine and never had any problems and all in remission. I'm not saying that. But the great majority of them did much, much better if they gave up animal products. However, if they continued eating meat, dairy, and eggs, they generally did poorly because some cancers have a very terrible prognosis. And despite all the surgery, chemo, and radiation, we have a tough time saving people with certain kinds of cancers. Meat promotes cancers of many different kinds. And if you're looking for timely research, this was published this year in 2021 in the Journal of Food Chemistry by Chinese researchers. This doctor's name is Yin Huang, and he found that meat eating is correlated with gastric cancer, that's stomach cancer, lung cancer, nasopharyngeal, that's a head and neck cancer, endometrial, that's the inner lining of the uterus, oral, like cancer of the tongue, prostate cancer, and esophageal cancer, that's our food tube. Esophageal cancer is a very deadly cancer. Some cancers, it takes so long to find them that by the time we're able to successfully diagnose them, they're usually so far advanced that that person has a very low chance of surviving for 5 years. We call that the 5-year survival rate. Ovarian, pancreatic, esophageal cancers, these are some with very poor prognoses. This study that the Chinese researchers did was called an umbrella review. They were actually reviewing many, many different studies, and this was the pattern: meat promotes cancer. Alcohol is another thing that promotes cancer. The Swiss researchers in 2014 published in the journal Alcohol Research that many cancers, but especially breast and colon, list alcohol as a risk factor. Now, according to the alcohol industry, alcohol is good for you, especially if it's wine, comes from grapes, got resveratrol. But this is a false claim, even though it's true that some components of grapes do great things for you. The good news is, though, you don't have to ferment the grape to get the good things out of the grape. And alcohol is correlated with between 60 to 200 diseases, depending on which source you quote. World Health Organization says more than 200 diseases are correlated with alcohol. And that doesn't even count the traumas. Alcohol is the 4th leading cause of death in this country. Alcohol marketing, as we have seen, you've heard me say this over and over, they distort the scientific facts. They downplay the risks, just like the tobacco industry did, just like the food industry did. Most food labels on the front of the package make health claims, natural, or trying to get you to think that they're healthy, while sweeping under the rug the parts of their food that isn't so healthy. So, who tells us to stop all the alcohol? It's that respected journal, The Lancet, and in 2018, they published a review of more than 700 studies involving millions of people in 195 countries. Now, how many countries are there total? Like, last time I counted about 199, so this is a lot of countries. And I'm quoting this study from 2018 in The Lancet that said, quote, "No level of alcohol consumption improves health. You don't need alcohol to be healthy." And the World Health Organization recommends that people stop all alcohol, and the American Institute for Cancer Research recommends not drinking any alcohol at all. Also, the people who drink alcohol are much more likely to get sick with contagious disease, like influenza and COVID. And according to this Lancet study in 2018, Why Die Prematurely? A review of 83 prospective studies. That's good science, because you start with the people and you're not really sure what the outcome is, and you follow them through time as time goes forward. They show that the more alcohol you drink, the more likely you are to die prematurely. Caffeine also causes cancer. Now, that's a very controversial statement, unless you read the science, because Dr. Lewis published from the University of Minnesota in 2008 that ovarian cancer is much more likely in drinkers of caffeinated coffee. Now, they studied more than 29,000 women, and these women were recruited from within the Iowa Women's Health Study, a very big study. Ovarian cancer is much more likely in drinkers of caffeinated coffee, and the fact that they studied more than 29,000 people lets you know that this is pretty solid data. Remember, I talked to you about Dr. Karen Schleip at the National Institutes of Health, who in 2012 did studies correlating that when you intake caffeine in any form, even in the form of chocolate, it increases your level of estrogen. That's the biocycle study. And there are implications for many different diseases, among them cancer. We know that nicotine causes cancer because we've got more than 7,000 scientific studies to prove this. But it took all those studies for the tobacco industry to finally admit it, because they were denying it right up until, we had all those studies to show. And so, in 2012, in the journal Cancer Epidemiology, Dr. Tantamano Bartley published that there were lower rates of breast cancer among vegan women in the Adventist Health Study 2. The less animal protein in the diet, the less breast cancer. Here's another way of stating it from the Four Corners Breast Cancer Study, published in 2009 in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition by Dr. Murtaugh and colleagues. The more animal protein, the more breast cancer, and this was specifically studying Latino women. What about fish? Do fish also raise the level of excess estrogen and cause cancer? They do. According to a 2009 study by Dr. Wu and colleagues, eating fish is a risk factor for getting cancer of the breast. The name of their study was Dietary Patterns and Breast Cancer Risk in Asian American Women. In fact, the more that Asians eat fish, the more they get cancer, despite the fact that one of the blue zones is in Asia. It's in Okinawa, Japan. What's a blue zone? Have you heard of blue zones? Anybody? Yeah? This is where a remarkable percentage of the population lives to be 100 years old. So, you know, not every community can say that they have a bunch of 100-year-olds. So there are three of the top 3 blue zones in the world where there's a big percentage of people who are living to be 100 is Okinawa, Japan, Sardinia, Italy, and Loma Linda, California. Loma Linda is the only one within the United States. And there's only one of those 3 that is not shrinking. In other words, the number of people who are making it to 100 is getting less and less and less in Okinawa, Japan, and in Sardinia, but not in Loma Linda. Loma Linda, California has a lot of people who don't eat animal products. It has a lot of Seventh-day Adventists because we have a medical school there, and that's where I went to medical school. The more fiber in the diet, the less breast cancer, according to a 2011 study by Dr. Dong in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition. Quote, dietary fiber intake, remember dietary fiber is only found in plants, and risk of breast cancer, a meta-analysis of prospective cohort studies. I'm not trying to put you to sleep with all this science, but why did I include this? Because prospective cohort studies are really important in science. We get good data from prospective studies. And this was a meta-analysis showing data from a bunch of cohort prospective studies. I am very indebted to this wonderful man, Dr. T. Colin Campbell, PhD. He's a nutritional biochemist from Cornell University, and he and his son Thomas Campbell wrote a book called The China Study. Dr. Thomas Campbell is an MD. The father is a PhD who did an epic study. The Oxford University, Cornell, and the government of China all cooperated. I don't think another huge study like this will ever be done in the history of the world. I mean, it's just too amazing. And what they did was they fanned out across China in the countryside and in the cities, and they asked people detailed questions of what they ate, and they followed them through time. This study lasted many, many years. And what they found is that the more you eat meat, dairy, and eggs, the more diseases you have, the more Parkinson's disease, the more cancer, the more arthritis, the more autoimmune disease. It was amazing. I loved reading the China study. Yes, it's very scientific, but it's just so, the science is so rigorous, so well done, and so well explained. He's a good writer, and his son is too. These test results of one of the experiments that led up to studying the people of China are completely reproducible. In other words, if you took the same methods and applied them to your own lab animals in your research lab, you'd get the same results as Dr. T. Colin Campbell did. So what did he do with his lab animals? He fed them diets high in casein. Casein is the principal protein found in milk. 86% of the protein found in cow's milk is casein. And he fed them a diet that had 20% of their calories from casein, and that's roughly equivalent to the American diet, what most Americans are eating. And then he fed them, there's 2 groups of the rats, and he fed them a special cancer causer called aflatoxin, which causes liver cancer, and then studied them to see who got the cancers. One of them had a very low casein diet, 5%, about the amount of protein found in human breast milk, and one had the high like Americans are eating. So wherever the casein was, that's where the cancers grew. It was as if you could turn off cancer genes or turn them on, and this is how it worked. Just changing one nutritional substance by having the high casein, the cancers grew. But in the group with the low casein, they didn't have cancers, even though they were being fed the cancer-causing agent aflatoxin. And then he switched their diets. So the same mice that had gotten the cancer, or rats that had gotten the cancer, when they were put on the low casein diet, the cancer shrunk away as if they had had surgery or chemo or radiation. But they didn't. It was just a change in diet. And so they got better. They got well. Whereas in the original group, the rats that did not get the cancer because they had the low casein diet, when they were fed the 20% casein, the high casein diet, they got the cancers, just like the other group had done. And then he switched them again. So the original group that had the cancers with the high casein, and then the cancers had melted away, he gave them casein again, and back came the cancers, only 20% worse. And then he switched the diets again, so each group of lab rats had 2 times with a high casein and 2 times with a low casein. And each time, wherever the casein was, that's where the cancers were. So the more dairy protein, the more cancers. And they found that since the genetics of these lab rats was not being changed, it was just their diet, you could turn cancer genes on and off. That's like epigenetics, and it's very hopeful. Oh, by the way, let me go back there. If they use plant proteins and put that up to 20%, no cancers. No cancers. Why do you think that is? Well, the amino acids that are predominant in plants don't have as much sulfur-containing amino acids among the group of amino acids that make up the proteins as the animal products do. And the sulfur-containing ones make a lot of sulfuric acid, and that creates an acid environment. And cancer loves the acid environment, and it does not like the alkaline environment. And the more you eat a plant-based diet, you get an alkaline environment, which makes it much harder for cancer to start, grow, or spread. So the amino acids that have sulfur, methionine, cysteine, homocysteine, these are much more concentrated in the animal proteins than they are in the plant proteins. The largest source of getting excess estrogen and therefore cancer is eating. According to this study published in the Iranian Journal of Public Health in 2015, estrogens are unavoidable hormones in non-vegetarian and human nutrition. In other words, if you're eating meat, dairy, and eggs, you're getting in too much estrogen. And that makes sense. What part of the chicken do eggs come from? The ovary, a female part, estrogen, right? What part of the cow does the milk come from? A female part, estrogen. It makes sense, doesn't it? And in the Western diet, 60 to 70% of animal-derived estrogens come from dairy products. Estrogen, remember, we said this on Wednesday, so forgive me, but it bears repeating. Estrogen is like fertilizer. Estrogen promotes cell growth. Estrogen's like lawn fertilizer. If the cells are the lawn, it makes the cells grow. Excess estrogen promotes too much growth, and overgrowth of cells, or out-of-control growth, can be called cancer. Growth out of control, that's what cancer is. And an estrogen excess promotes growth out of control, according to Dr. Russo, who published in 2006 on estrogen and breast cancer. There are some fascinating books that don't have any pictures and are still worth the read. This is Whitewash. It provides scientific evidence for how milk relates to attention deficit disorder, cancer, and how it worsens osteoporosis. Wait, I thought milk did a body good. I thought all that calcium in milk was what you needed for your bones. That's what they tell you. Actually, not true at all. The countries that have the highest consumption of cow's milk have the highest rates of osteoporosis. And the reason for that is the people who are eating a lot of animal protein, like there is in cow's milk, are urinating away their calcium. Kind of like with taxes and income, it's not how much you make, it's how much you keep. Well, the same with calcium. It's not how much you take in, it's how much you keep. There are countries in this world that are taking in less calcium, but they have less osteoporosis than we do, or Sweden does, or Norway, where the consumption of calcium is very high. Now, what people group on the planet take in the most calcium? It's the Inuit, formerly called Eskimos. They grind up the bones of fish, and that has a lot of calcium because calcium is one of the components of bone. And so they have a very high intake of calcium, but they don't keep their calcium because they eat a lot of fish. And the acidity of the fish protein has to be washed out in the urine because that acid, the body has to keep the pH in a certain balance. And acid is a low pH and alkaline is a high pH. And so the kidney is flushing out the acids. That's the kidney's job, is to take acids out. And out with that acid, as it flushes out calcium. So the urinary calcium level of people who eat animal protein is much higher than people who eat plant protein. People who eat plant protein are hanging on to their protein. Pardon me. So, contrary to popular opinion, milk does not do a body good. And get your calcium from the same place the cows get it. Do they drink milk? No, they eat green plants. Now, of course, we can't digest grass. We don't have 5 stomachs like a cow. But we can digest and get the calcium out of the greens that we eat. And greens are a great source of calcium. Now let's talk about omega-3 fatty acids. Omega-3 fatty acids are found in fish oil. But why is that? Is it because fish make omega-3? No. Fish cannot make omega-3. They can eat green plants and get precursors of omega-3 and synthesize those, but omega-3 precursors come from plants. So we people cannot make our own omega-3. We've got to eat the green plants to get it. Should you take supplements of omega-3 or fish oil? No, you shouldn't. This research was published in 2006 in the British Medical Journal by Dr. Hooper and colleagues. They studied 89 different studies. These are cohort studies or randomized controlled trials, which is a very good kind of science. More than 600,000 subjects. That's a lot of people. And I'm quoting them, omega-3 fats do not prevent cancer. But one of the things that they said, kind of, buried in the study, clinically important harm, in other words, parentheses, cancer, I'm quoting them, could not be excluded. Whoa! And then Dr. Dean Ornish did a study on fats and prostate cancer and supplements for high-fat supplements like omega-3, an aggressive form of prostate cancer. So don't take fish oil. Get your omega-3 from green plants, the same place that the fish get it, because that's what they eat. And then bigger fish eat littler fish, and that's how that goes. And you're not going to get dementia from a deficiency of omega-3. You don't need oils to get your omega-3. All you need is leafy greens twice a day, and you're going to get all that is recommended that you need. So speaking of supplements, let's talk about some of the harm from supplements. My dear mother was raised she's in her 90s, and she was raised in an era when vitamins were just the best thing to come along. And she thought, vitamins, they're good for you. So imagine the surprise of everyone when it came out showing in 1994 that vitamins can cause serious harm. 67 trials are analyzed in a meta-analysis by Cochrane Reports. Now, I have a great deal of respect for the Cochrane Reports. In 2008, this was published. Taking beta-carotene, vitamin A, and vitamin E as supplements significantly increase mortality. What does that mean? You got a greater risk of dying if you're taking these fat-soluble vitamins, vitamin A and vitamin E, as supplements. So there was a 74% increased risk of hemorrhagic stroke. Remember last night we talked about the 2 different types of stroke? The bleeding kind, that's hemorrhagic, and the clotting kind. A 74% increased risk of hemorrhagic stroke. And remember I told you that the hemorrhagic stroke can often be very much more devastating. Not always, but can be very much more devastating. So don't take vitamin E supplements and don't take vitamin A supplements. They also increased the risk of liver cancer, vitamin A did, by 18%. So get your vitamins from whole plant foods. However, if you do take these vitamins in the form of whole plant foods, then there's a 19% decreased risk. Let's look at that. The National Cancer Institute scientists studied more than 29,000 male smokers for 5 to 8 years, and they published this in 1994. This was a firestorm. I remember when this came out. Plant food form beta-carotene decreased the risk for cancer by 19%, but pill form vitamin A increased the risk for lung cancer by 18%, and all-cause mortality, in other words, risk of dying from any reason, by 8%. and was published again in 2008 in Journal of American Medical Association. So the vitamins inside pills, the vitamins inside pills, harmful sometimes. The vitamins inside foods, good for you. Okay, so how is it, besides creating an acid environment, that animal proteins cause cancer? We're gonna run through some things that I'm not gonna bore you with too much of the science here tonight, but TMAO, trimethylamine oxidase, is a very potent heart attack causer, but it can really, really create a lot of cancer. And so when we eat animal protein, now this is specifically eggs are very high in choline, and the gut bacteria can turn some of these precursors into TMA, and that's just so toxic to the body that it goes to the liver and gets oxidized to TMAO, but it can cause a lot of cancer. And then there's polyaromatic hydrocarbons. When we cook meat, we can release things that are very cancer causing. These are, there's a whole class of those. And then there's acrylamides. When you sear meat, like charbroiled, that can really cause a lot of cancer. And heated oils. Did you know that the people who work in restaurants and they're frying meat in the deep fat fryer, they have way higher incidence of lung cancer just from working with the heated oils that are frying meat. The fumes get in the air, they breathe it in, a lot more lung cancer. People who work in the chicken industry, in the beef industry, they're processing animals in the slaughterhouse, way more disease, especially cancers, and Crohn's disease and autoimmune. A lot of things are coming because some of these triggers for these diseases are viruses. It's kind of a perfect storm, and a virus can come from the animals to the workers in the slaughterhouses and make them sick. AGEs are advanced glycation end products, and animal proteins and oils have a lot of them, and AGEs, like their acronym implies, can age you prematurely and cause cancer. So, vegetables can prevent cancer. Anthocyanins are really cancer-fighting things. Cyano is kind of an abbreviation for blue. Anthocyanins are found in blueberries and other purpley kind of vegetables like the red cabbage and eggplant and those kinds of things. And then there's insulin-like growth factor 1. The higher it is, the more cancer. So if you want to have less cancer, eat more plants. The standard American diet causes suffering, but this is Shirley, and she's on her way to much better health. She's reversed some diseases, and Shirley's feeling so much better these days, and I'm very proud of her. How animal products cause cancer? The last one that I'll mention is nitrates. Nitrates in food especially are harmful. Red meats and colon cancer, the link is well established there. Okay, a whole food, plant-based, no oil diet fights cancer. That can be abbreviated WFPBNO, whole food, plant-based. Men who get prostate cancer are often given anti-estrogen shots. You'd think that being men, they'd be given anti-testosterone shots, but no. It's the estrogen that makes the prostate cancer grow. That's why milk, cow's milk, is such a big promoter of prostate cancer. And you can kind of see how this correlates because they're given anti-estrogen shots so powerful that it puts them into like menopausal hot flashes, and then these men are miserable on those shots. Estrogen makes the fetus grow, and estrogen makes the cancer grow. But a whole food plant-based diet that's no oil fights cancer in a different way, and that's the way of saturated fat. Remember we talked about saturated fat being solid at body temperature, so it plugs up your arteries, blocks them. Well, whole food plant-based no oil eaters take in a lot less saturated fat, because saturated fat, the primary source for it, is animal protein, animal fat. There's coconut too, but the people who are eating coconut are usually not eating it every day, whereas the people who are eating meat are eating some form of it every day. And saturated fat is highly correlated with cancer risk, especially breast cancer risk. All oils contain some saturated fat, which is why I've chosen to give up all oils. Even the healthiest oil of all, olive oil, is still 14% of its calories from saturated fat. Okay. The less oil, the less body fat, and the less estrogen we make. Remember that in the Adventist Health Study 2, the more plants you ate, and the closer you were to eating only plants, the lower the excess body fat, so the less likely to be overweight. And remember that every body fat cell is a factory for estrogen, and estrogen is a growth promoter, and growth out of control is cancer. So, some people call them the 8 natural doctors. Other people call them the 8 natural laws of health. Nutrition, such as a plant-based, oil-free diet. Exercise. If you can get some exercise daily, it's going to really help you. Water, drinking 64 ounces before 5 p.m. if you're at least 5 feet tall, and drinking it in between meals, it's going to really help. Getting sunlight every day, very helpful. Temperance, what is that? That's an old-fashioned word from like the 1700s, 1800s. It means avoiding the things that are harmful and using in moderation the things that are good. It doesn't say all things in moderation. It says only the good things in moderation. I mean, you can still overeat on good things, and that's not a good thing to overeat. Temperance especially refers to the things that harm us, such as caffeine, nicotine, alcohol, pot, street drugs. Getting outdoor fresh air is very important, and after these last 18 months of this pandemic, we know that COVID just barely doesn't even transmit outdoors. It's really good to get fresh outdoor air. Rest is important. 2 hours of sleep before midnight is worth 4 hours of sleep after midnight when it comes to reversing cancer or putting it into remission or preventing it in the first place. And then trust in God. Trust in His power. Trust in His love. But is it a blind trust? How can we find out the truth about God so that we can trust in Him? Let's bring up Pastor Michael Wolford, who serves the Pine Bluff community as a Bible-believing Christian. Pastor Wolford says that God cares about our mental health, our spiritual health, and our physical health. Pastor Wolford, how does the Bible help us to decide what to eat and drink?
Well, let's look at this powerful promise that's up on the screen. 1 Corinthians 10:31. Whether therefore ye or you eat or drink or whatsoever you do, do all to the glory of God. Whether therefore you eat or drink or whatsoever you do all to the glory of God. We saw last night that when we stop bad habits, the body is very resilient and very forgiving. And very quickly, when you stop that which is causing a bad effect, the bad effect stops. But it's just as true, it's equally true, that when you build good habits, that speeds up that healing process and that rebuilding process and that strengthening process. So how do we build good habits? How do we stop bad habits? I want to read something to you that just happened as I wrote notes. I wrote them in my day planner. And right at the top, they put these little statements, and I thought this one was good enough to share with you tonight. It says the first step towards getting somewhere is to decide that you're not going to stay where you are. The first step in getting somewhere is to decide you're not going to stay where you are. I thought that was good enough to share. You know, have you ever climbed a mountain? We don't have big mountains here, but we've got some mountains, even in Arkansas. You can climb any mountain one step at a time. You just got to take one step and then another step. And when you do, you start getting some good views. You really do. Well, that's just an object lesson. So where do we get the power to take these positive steps, these new habits, to build good habits, to eat and drink whatever we eat and drink for the glory of God? Well, we get the power from God. God has put a lot of power in nature. God is the author of nature, so He has power. There's natural laws that operate. But when you ask God for power, and He unites His creation power with the power He's put in nature, there's victory. And when you cooperate with God and submit to God and ask for His help, you will make powerful progress. In fact, God will fill you and thrill you with so much power that you'll wonder what happened, and you'll start walking in that power. Matthew 7:7-8 says, ask, and you will receive. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and the door will be open to you, because whoever asks receives. And whoever knocks, the door is open. And whoever seeks finds. It's for everybody and anybody. Oh, it's a free gift of grace from a merciful God who delights in mercy.
Thank you. I appreciate that encouragement that God will empower us to change bad habits for good. Thank you very much. So I want you to come on Monday nights to our support group for plant-based science and tasting. We're going to we'll talk about how to cook to avoid or reverse autoimmune diseases and pain, heart disorders and arthritis, erectile dysfunction, which can be cured without Viagra by changing the diet. So many of my male patients have been able to get off their Viagra and no longer need it. And hypertension, which is high blood pressure, and of course overweight. And we'll be tasting some delicious cookies this coming Monday night. And on Tuesday night, that's where the hope comes. Faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the Word of God. There are exciting things in the Word of God, and Pastor Michael Wolford is going to lead us through those Bible studies to help us beat food cravings, kick addictions, and see answers behind what's going on in the world, to gain spiritual power for victory in real life when we study the Bible together. And remember that on Tuesday at the support group, that's where you'll be able to get some prizes. The one that I'm featuring today is cancer prevention and women's health. And even though I've combined those two subjects that we talked about Wednesday and tonight in this one, the 8 secrets I shared on Wednesday are available to refresh your memory from them. And you can, if you don't want to wait till Tuesday night, you can rent it on Veggievore or buy it there. Remember, when you go home tonight, to go to healthreboot.com, or if you don't have internet at your home, stop by the registration desk and we can type in your questions for you. And one of the other videos that'll be a door prize on some of the Tuesday nights is Ask the Doc, because the cancer lecture generates a lot of questions. And so there's many theories out there about cancer. And I don't want anyone to ever feel that I blame anyone for any of their diseases, because this is a world of unfortunate suffering. But the reason that I tell people about natural ways for preventing disease and even reversing disease is because if you know these things and you put them into practice, you can achieve a greater degree of health than if you're simply relying on ill, pill, and bill medicine. So, 7 p.m. every night this week. Tomorrow night, depression and anxiety, one of my favorite topics because it's so widespread. On Saturday night, all the things that give us the aches and pains and the autoimmune diseases, which are one of the fastest growing categories of disease in our world today. And on Monday, tasty cooking tips. And on Tuesday, hope through Bible study. Thank you again for coming. I really appreciate you being here, especially in the rain. And I will see you tomorrow night. Oops, I'm sorry, I should have changed this slide. It shouldn't say Thursday, it should say Friday, and it shouldn't say cancer, it should say depression and anxiety. I'm grateful to all the people who I have learned from their books and videos, and come on back tomorrow night. We'll see you tomorrow night.
Yes.